The war in Ukraine is more than just a conflict between two neighboring countries. It is a global event with far-reaching consequences that touch every corner of the world. When Russian forces crossed the border in February 2022, they did not just start a military campaign, they disrupted an international order that had been in place for decades. This war has tested alliances. It has reshaped economies. It has created a humanitarian crisis on a scale not seen in Europe for many years. The fighting has sent ripples across the globe, affecting the price of grain in Africa and the cost of energy in Europe. It has forced nations to reevaluate their security and their dependence on others. Understanding this conflict is important for everyone, not just those in Eastern Europe. The principles at stake are universal. They include a nation's right to determine its own future and the idea that borders shouldn't be changed by force. The war highlights a larger struggle between worldviews. For a war of this magnitude to end quickly, something dramatic and decisive must happen. Long wars often settle into a slow, grinding pattern, where neither side can achieve a knockout blow. They become wars of attrition, where victory is measured in small gains of territory, and the gradual wearing down of the enemy's resources and will to fight. This has been the reality in Ukraine for many months, with brutal battles fought over small towns, villages along a vast front line. The current situation, as of our perspective today in late August 2025, seems locked in this very pattern, making the idea of a sudden end feel distant. However, history is filled with examples of wars that ended abruptly due to unforeseen events. A sudden change can act like a key that unlocks a stalemate. This could be a military breakthrough, a political upheaval, or a diplomatic agreement. The first scenario that could bring a swift end to the war is a sudden military collapse on the Russian side. This would not be a slow retreat, but a rapid and chaotic disintegration of the front line. Imagine a situation where Ukrainian forces, perhaps using newly supplied advanced weaponry and innovative tactics, achieve a major breakthrough in a key sector. This is not just about taking a single town. It is about punching a large hole through heavily fortified Russian defenses. Such a breakthrough could sever Russian supply lines, leaving large numbers of troops cut off from ammunition, food, and reinforcements. This process could begin with a carefully planned and executed Ukrainian offensive. We have seen glimpses of this potential in the past, such as the successful Kharkiv offensive in the autumn of 2022. In that operation, Ukrainian forces moved quickly, catching Russian troops by surprise and forcing a disorganized retreat. A future operation on a much larger scale could have an even more dramatic effect. If Ukrainian forces were to, for example, successfully push south to the Sea of Azov, the Ukrainian military would advance rapidly, liberating towns and cities in quick succession. A military collapse of the kind we just discussed would have immediate and profound consequences that extend far beyond the battlefield. For years, the Kremlin has carefully constructed an image of a powerful and invincible Russian military. The Russian public, fed a steady diet of state-controlled media, would be confronted with a reality impossible to ignore. The narrative of a successful special military operation would crumble, leaving a vacuum of anger and disillusionment. This internal political crisis could lead to significant challenges for the current leadership in Moscow. The so-called patriotic factions might feel betrayed. We saw a preview of this with the short-lived mutiny led by Yevgeny Prigozhin in 2023. A much larger military failure could trigger more serious, widespread challenges to the Kremlin's authority. A country that projects power through military strength would be exposed as far weaker than perceived. This would embolden countries on Russia's periphery. Key partners like China might reevaluate the benefits of aligning with a weakened Russia. Faced with military disaster and growing instability at home and abroad, the Kremlin's options would be severely limited. The second scenario, for a rapid end to the war, is centered on a political change within Russia. Wars are started and continued by political leaders. A change in that leadership can dramatically alter a country's course. If President Vladimir Putin were to leave power for any reason, his successor might not have the same personal investment in the conflict. A new leader, facing the immense economic and military costs of the war, could decide to cut its losses and seek a quick exit from Ukraine. This change in leadership could happen in several ways. One possibility, a voluntary resignation, due to health or other reasons. Another possibility, a more forceful removal by other powerful figures in the Kremlin. The Russian political system is often described as opaque. A consensus could emerge among these elites that the war has become a strategic mistake threatening long-term stability and prosperity. In that case, they might orchestrate a transition of power to someone who could negotiate an end to the conflict. They could frame withdrawal not as a defeat, but as a necessary step to correct past mistakes and focus on Russia's internal problems. A change in leadership in Russia would not happen in a vacuum. It would likely be the result of immense internal pressures, making the situation unsustainable. One major pressure is economic. The war is incredibly expensive, draining the budget, forcing cuts to domestic priorities, healthcare, infrastructure, pensions. Sanctions have damaged key sectors and limited access to technology and created hardships for ordinary citizens. Over time, that economic pain can lead to public discontent. Another pressure is the human cost. Every loss is a grieving family and a community affected. Pressure can also come from the elite. Economic, social, elite, and military pressure together could create a perfect storm, forcing a political shift that leads to a rapid end to the war in Ukraine. The third path to a quick end to the war is through a sudden and unexpected diplomatic breakthrough. This might seem unlikely given the current distance between the Russian and Ukrainian positions. Both sides have publicly stated demands that the other finds completely unacceptable. However, a major external event or a shared crisis could dramatically change the incentives for both sides, making a negotiated settlement suddenly attractive. Leaders from major powers might step in to mediate. United States, China, India. Another potential trigger could be a large-scale disaster or accident, such as a major incident at a nuclear power plant. A radiological disaster would not respect borders and would threaten the health and safety of millions across Europe. The immediate need to contain the crisis could force an immediate ceasefire and create an urgent imperative for cooperation. In the face of such a shared threat, the reasons for fighting could suddenly seem secondary to the need for survival. The diplomatic breakthrough might also come from a simple, mutual realization of exhaustion. Continuing to fight will only lead to more death and destruction without changing the reality on the ground. This mutual pain can create a secret window of opportunity for negotiators to work out a deal away from the public eye. If those conditions line up, diplomacy can move very quickly. When the conditions are right for a diplomatic breakthrough, the process of reaching a deal can move with surprising speed. The first step would likely happen in secret. High-level envoys from Russia, Ukraine, and perhaps a mediating country like Turkey or the United States would start meeting discreetly. Publicly, the leaders would continue to use strong and uncompromising language to maintain support at home. But behind the scenes, these envoys would be exploring the outlines of a possible agreement. They would be trying to find a landing zone where the core interests of both sides could be met. The key to any deal would be finding creative solutions to the most difficult issues, especially the status of the territories occupied by Russia. A possible compromise might involve a phased withdrawal of Russian troops over a set period. For the most contentious regions, like Crimea, the deal might involve deferring a final decision on sovereignty for several years and establishing a demilitarized status with international guarantees. Security guarantees for Ukraine would be another essential component of any agreement. The agreement would have to be carefully crafted to give Ukraine the security it needs without being seen by Moscow as a direct threat. Once the secret negotiations produce a viable framework, the final stage would unfold quickly. The deal would be presented as the best possible outcome under the circumstances, ending the bloodshed and allowing rebuilding to begin. As we stand today on August 23, 2025, the war in Ukraine appears locked in a difficult and bloody stalemate. The daily reality is one of grinding trench warfare with little movement on the front lines. This has led many to believe the conflict will drag on for years as a frozen conflict. However, the stability of this situation may be more fragile than it appears. Immense pressures on both sides create the potential for sudden, dramatic shifts. We have examined three plausible scenarios. First, a decisive military event. Second, a political upheaval inside Russia. Third, a diplomatic breakthrough. Each pathway, military, political, diplomatic, shows a different vulnerability. Military, fragility of morale and logistics. Political, strain on the state and elites. Diplomatic, when incentives for peace outweigh benefits of war, even intractable conflicts can end. None of these are guaranteed, but they're rooted in the realities of the conflict and wartime history. The future is not yet written. The situation could evolve many ways. The potential for a sudden end exists, Understanding these possibilities helps us look beyond the horizon. The hope for millions is that one of these pathways, or another we can't foresee, leads to lasting peace, allowing Ukraine to rebuild and restoring some stability to a shaken world.